The Ring camera footage exists. It's right there, time-stamped, preserved, sitting inside a server somewhere. And in that footage, there's a man standing near Nancy Guthrie's front door in the middle of the night. 87 days later, nobody has said who he is, not officially, not publicly. The Pima County Sheriff's Office hasn't released his name. They haven't charged anyone. They haven't explained why a figure appears on that camera in the hours surrounding the disappearance of an 84-year-old woman. And the investigation goes quiet. That's the part the cable news coverage glossed over. That's the part I want to sit with today. Because this case isn't just a missing person story. It's a story about what happens when the gaps between the official narrative and the documented evidence start to widen. And in the Nancy Guthrie case, those gaps are significant. To understand what we're actually looking at here, you have to understand who Nancy Guthrie was, not as a footnote to her daughter's fame, but as a person. She was 84 years old, living in a quiet, sun-bleached neighborhood on the outskirts of Tucson, Arizona. People who knew her, people who had lived next to her for decades, describe her the same way every single time: vivacious, open, warm. The kind of woman who would invite a stranger onto her porch and hand them a glass of water before she even knew their name. Her neighbor, who has lived close enough to see Nancy's front door from her own windows, told me directly, she was just a lovely person. The kind of person who would have welcomed someone in, no hesitation, no suspicion. That detail matters. I'll come back to it. Her daughter is Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, one of the most recognizable faces in American morning television. And it was Savannah herself who gave the public the most chilling description of what allegedly happened. Her words, not mine. Nancy was taken from her bed in the middle of the night. From a home she had lived in for years, in a neighborhood where people still hang yellow ribbons in the trees and wrap them around their mailboxes 3 months later, still waiting. Think about what that means. Taken from her bed, not from a parking lot, not from a trail, from inside her house while she was sleeping. Whoever did this knew where she slept. If you haven't been following this case and you want every update as it breaks, and there are more coming, this is the right time to subscribe to Redacted Files Lab. Hit that button now. I cover the details that don't make the morning news cycle, and the Nancy Guthrie case is exactly the kind of story this channel exists for. Now, let's talk about what the timeline actually shows. January 11th. That is the date that keeps surfacing when you dig into the neighborhood accounts. Aldine, one of Nancy's closest neighbors, a woman who has lived on that street long enough to know the rhythm of every house on the block, was awake that night, and from her bathroom window she saw something, a person, walking down the street at an hour when that street should have been completely empty, walking in a way that registered as wrong to her, off enough that she remembered it. She reported it. The FBI came back specifically to speak with her about that moment after her account became known. She couldn't see their face. She told me that directly. She couldn't be much more help beyond the fact that she noticed it, that it was something odd. Here's what I keep coming back to. In a neighborhood where a woman has just vanished, a neighborhood now under parking restrictions, with signs still posted along the street months later, someone walked through it that night, unhurried enough to be visible from a second-floor bathroom window, present enough that a neighbor held on to that memory for months. That person has never been publicly identified either. Now here's where the redacted files part of this story gets genuinely strange. There is documented footage of a man near Nancy Guthrie's property. This isn't speculation. It's been referenced by investigators, by neighbors, by people close to the case. The sheriff's office knows who they're looking for, at least visually. Aldine said it plainly. Someone knows that man in the video. Someone somewhere in Tucson or connected to that neighborhood knows exactly who was standing near that door. They just haven't come forward. 87 days. No name. No arrest. No announcement that this individual has been cleared, identified, or located. And here's the question the standard media coverage never really answered. How does a man appear on a Ring camera in connection with the disappearance of a nationally known figure's mother and remain unidentified for nearly 3 months? In 2025, with facial recognition tools, with the full weight of a joint FBI and local law enforcement task force, with a public that has plastered this case across every platform imaginable, either that footage is less clear than we've been led to believe, or the identification has already happened privately and there are reasons we haven't been told, or something about that footage is more complicated than a single man at a door. I don't know which of those it is. But I know that the absence of an answer after this much time is itself a data point. Now let me tell you about something that's been sitting in the background of this case, something that got almost no serious attention in the initial wave of coverage. Nancy Guthrie's property included a casita, a separate small living space on the same lot, and according to accounts from neighbors and people familiar with the property, at some point in the recent past that casita was being rented out. A car was parked there regularly, not just for a few weeks, for months, possibly up to a year or more. Let that settle for a moment. Someone had routine, legitimate, sustained access to Nancy Guthrie's property, not a visitor, not a contractor stopping by for an afternoon, someone who parked there repeatedly over an extended period of time, someone who would have learned the rhythms of that house, who might have known what her schedule looks like when she was home, where her bedroom was. The investigative task force has reportedly gone back years in their canvass of Nancy's connections, contractors, repair people, anyone who had stepped inside that house for any reason at all. That level of retroactive investigation tells you something about the working theory. This was not random. Whoever took Nancy Guthrie from her bed had, investigators reportedly believe, some prior knowledge of her or her home. The casita rental history, if a previous or recent tenant maintained any familiarity with that property, represents exactly the kind of thread that a thorough investigation would have to pull hard on. Was it pulled? We don't know publicly. What we know is that the investigation has been ongoing. The FBI is deeply involved, and still, no arrest. And if you've been following Redacted Files Lab, you know this is the part of a case where I want to talk about the things that didn't happen, the searches that weren't done, the help that was turned away, the United Cajun Navy. If you're not familiar with them, they are a volunteer search and rescue organization with a documented record of finding things that official searches miss: drone teams, K-9 units, manned aircraft, and a partnership with Mexican search specialists who know the border terrain better than almost anyone alive. They've been deployed in disasters and missing persons cases across multiple states. On roughly half of their searches, they find remains that were never the subject of the original search, cold cases, other missing individuals, other families who had been waiting for years. They reached out to the Pima County Sheriff's Office early in the Nancy Guthrie investigation. They submitted a formal search plan. They had personnel on the ground in Tucson waiting. They were ready to mobilize aerial assets within 72 hours, a full ground operation within a week. The Sheriff's Office declined. Their stated reason: not accepting outside help from volunteers at this time. That's it. That's the whole answer. I want to be fair here. Law enforcement agencies have legitimate reasons to decline outside organizations in active investigations: contamination of evidence, liability, coordination complexity with an unfamiliar group. Those are real concerns, and the United Cajun Navy themselves have been careful not to criticize the sheriff's decision. They don't want to come in with muddy shoes, as Brian Trasher put it to me. They want to be invited, not forced. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. We are now nearly 3 months in. The desert around Tucson is vast and brutal. Cactus terrain that tears through equipment, heat that sidelines search dogs within hours. There are areas out there that no official search team has reached because official resources are finite, and Pima County covers a lot of ground. And the answer to an organization that finds human remains on 50% of its searches was no. Why? Here's what the evidence picture looks like from the outside. Right now, there is a hair sample found inside Nancy Guthrie's home, collected by investigators, submitted to the FBI lab for DNA analysis. As of the most recent reporting, no significant results have been announced. DNA lab work takes time, sometimes months. That process is still ongoing. There is the Ring camera footage with the unidentified figure. There is the January 11th sighting, the unknown walker in the dark, no face, no name. There's the casita rental history. There's a task force conducting one of the most intensive retroactive canvasses in recent Arizona missing persons history, going back years. And there are the FBI agents who keep returning to the neighborhood. Not once, multiple times. They are following threads. They know things that haven't been made public. That is standard procedure, and I'm not suggesting otherwise. But the combination of all of this, the unidentified camera figure, the casita access history, the refused search operation, the hair sample still in the lab, paints a picture of an investigation that is very much alive, very much working, and still very much without a public answer. 87 days after an 84-year-old woman was allegedly taken from her bed. Let me give you the 3 working theories that serious analysts connected to this case have discussed, because I think the viewer is owed a real conversation about what could have happened here. The first is what investigators call the known contact scenario. The most statistically likely explanation, in cases like this one, is that the person responsible had some prior connection to the victim, not necessarily a close relationship. Sometimes it's someone who worked on the house, drove through the neighborhood regularly, or knew the property layout from a previous interaction. The casita rental history fits this model almost too perfectly. Someone who spent months near that house would know its rhythms, would know when the lights went off, when the neighborhood went quiet, where the bedroom was relative to the entrance. What allegedly happened here required knowledge, not guesswork. The second theory is targeted access. This is the harder one to sit with because it points towards something more deliberate and more premeditated. In this scenario, the individual or individuals responsible specifically selected Nancy Guthrie, not randomly, not simply because she was an elderly woman living alone, but because of who she was adjacent to, because of her daughter's profile, because of something specific about this woman, this house, this family. The FBI's sustained and intensive involvement, and the FBI does not invest this level of resource in standard missing persons cases, may suggest that the national dimension of the case is being taken seriously as a potential motive factor. The third theory is the one that investigators typically exhaust last, precisely because it's the hardest to close. A stranger, someone passing through, someone with no documented history in that neighborhood, no connection to the rental records, no name on any contractor list. The January 11th sighting, the unknown walker, the one without a face, could, in the worst version of this theory, represent exactly that person, in, out, and gone into a state that contains enough desert to hide almost anything. All 3 theories are active. None have been eliminated publicly. And the DNA results from that hair sample could, depending on what they show, collapse 2 of those 3 theories very fast. I want to tell you something about what that neighborhood feels like right now, because it matters to understanding the human weight of this case. The yellow ribbons are still in the trees, wrapped around mailboxes, tied to branches, faded slightly from the Arizona sun but still visible from the street. Fresh flowers still appear outside the house, placed by people who drive or walk over, who can't explain why they keep coming back except that they can't stop thinking about it. The parking restriction signs are still posted along the block, a quiet bureaucratic acknowledgement that this is still, technically, an active scene. The neighbors who knew Nancy for decades are suspended in something that has no clean word for it. They're not grieving in the traditional sense because there has been no confirmation. They're not hopeful in any simple sense because 3 months of silence is heavy. They want a memorial but hold back. They want to say goodbye but refuse to because goodbye requires a finality that hasn't been given to them. Aldine told me something that I haven't been able to shake. She said that Nancy was the kind of person who probably would have loved the connections that have been made because of all of this. The people who've reached out to each other, the community that formed around trying to find her. She would have loved that detail, the idea that the woman at the center of all of this would have responded to her own disappearance with warmth and genuine delight at human connection. That is the thing that makes this case hit differently. She wasn't just a victim of circumstance. She was a person with a specific, documented personality. And that personality may have been, in the cruelest possible irony, part of what made her vulnerable. The open door, the welcoming nature, the tendency to trust. Ed Smart has spoken about this case publicly. Elizabeth Smart's father, a man who knows from the inside what it means to wait for someone who should have been home, has urged people not to let this story fade. That kind of voice carries weight because the people who've lived through the waiting understand better than anyone what the silence cost a family. Here's where the case stands, as best as anyone outside of law enforcement can know. The hair evidence is with the FBI lab. DNA results are pending. The Ring camera footage has been analyzed. The task force is actively working backward through years of Nancy's contacts. The FBI has made repeated return visits to the neighborhood. The United Cajun Navy's offer remains open. Their plan can be revised and resubmitted within 72 hours if the call comes. There is a public petition asking the Pima County Sheriff's Office to reconsider. No charges have been filed. No remains have been found. No one has been publicly named. The investigation is active. That is the state of the file. That is what we know. The rest is what's been redacted. I want to close with the question that I can't answer, and that I don't think law enforcement has answered publicly either. And I want you to tell me what you think in the comments, because this one genuinely matters. The Pima County Sheriff's Office turned away a professional volunteer search organization with aerial capabilities, trained K-9 teams, desert terrain expertise, and a documented history of finding things that official searches miss. They did this without a detailed public explanation. They did this in an active case involving a missing 84-year-old woman with no arrest made and no remains located in nearly 3 months. Here's my question. At what point does refusing outside help in a case this visible, this cold, and this geographically demanding become a failure of duty to the missing person and to her family? And do you think the sheriff's office should reverse course? Yes or no, and why? I want your answer in the comments, the real one. Subscribe to Redacted Files Lab. I post every development in this case the moment it breaks, and there are cases in the pipeline behind this one that are, if anything, more disturbing in how they were handled. You don't want to miss what's coming. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 87 days. Someone knows what happened. Someone somewhere knows that man in the Ring camera footage. The DNA is in a lab. The desert is still out there, unsearched. The file isn't closed. It's just been redacted.